and I just hopefully people will just want to listen to us. Who knows?
Oh, well, yeah, they love us. There's no
Yeah, exactly. What's not to love? This is Tyler Jefcoat joining us today. And Tyler has been an A2X expert partner for, gosh, the past, do you think it's 5 years?
It's getting close. I think it's about 3.5 years.
Oh, is it 3.5? Gosh, I love to exaggerate. That's what I like to do. But I feel like we've known you for a long, long time. And Tyler is, an absolute guru when it comes to e-commerce accounting and bookkeeping. But also his experience and knowledge goes a lot further than that. Has actually helped a lot of Amazon businesses sell and exit their business. And so today, that's what we're going to be talking about. You know, there's such a large focus on growing your business and getting it to a certain level. But what happens when you do actually want to exit, and what do you kind of have to have lined up? So I'll pass over to you, Tyler. Is there anything else I can add to your kind of background?
No, I think you nailed it. I mean, I grew and I sold a business in 2017 in a different industry. So I was in the healthcare space, and my background is kind of in mergers. So I'm an accountant, but my MBA focus is really in finance. And so I think I'm just really interested in this phenomenon that's happening now with the Amazon ecospace, where lots and lots of cash is coming in, and making good choices related to potentially exiting it's more important now than it ever has been. So it's a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Awesome. Hey, so let's get straight into it. Can anyone sell their Amazon business? I know I'm focusing on Amazon, but e-commerce business.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer to the can anyone sell their Amazon business is probably, if it's ever been true that anyone can sell it, it probably is true now because of how much private equity and venture capital is in our space. Having said that, not all e-commerce or Amazon focused businesses are made alike. So if you're a retail arbitrage play with it's kind of a flimsy supply chain model, then you're not going to get the same kind of value or multiple, and you're not going to have as many suitors as if you're a really tight brand that has great numbers on Amazon, maybe has some international expansion, that kind of thing. And so the answer is yes, you can probably sell your business as long as you're making money. But in terms of getting these just crazy values that we're starting to see in the market right now, having a private label or fully formed brand, and obviously Amazon's an important part of that sales channel process, it's just a really good thing right now. It's a great time to be an Amazon seller.
Yeah, for sure. And okay, so should we kind of, once someone's, they're like, okay, I feel like it's time to exit, how would they go about kind of finding a buyer?
Yeah, so it used to be kind of 18 months ago, you would really have only a few options. Unless you had a huge network of investors, you would go interview 3 or 4 brokers, find one that you love, and then you'd list your asset, almost like you would list your home on the market if you're trying to sell real estate, and you'd field different offers and pick one and close the deal. I think what has made the market more interesting now, Ellen, is just that they call them the aggregators, these funds, these investors have raised lots and lots of money. And so they kind of have this tact of trying to almost cut out the brokers and go directly to the sellers to say, hey, why don't you not pay the broker fee? We'll just buy the asset from you directly. And for some sellers, that can be a really good thing where you can negotiate your own deal and feel like you got the value you wanted to for your business. But to be honest with you, Ellen, for a lot of sellers, if you're not a very sophisticated negotiator, you end up being in the room with really, really kind of smart M&A attorneys and negotiators for this huge $50+ million fund. And it's easy to get lowballed and kind of not understand really what your business is worth. And so my counsel to our CFO clients is, unless you're just a really like a crack shot negotiator and you have a lot of M&A experience, it's probably still good to have somebody in your corner helping you get the deal done, helping you find that right buyer.
Yeah, totally. And negotiating is so hard. I always feel like I go in. Do you know, actually once when I was traveling, I was in Morocco and they were telling me, they were like, they'll tell you this price and then you need to go here and then you're going to, and I just was terrible at it because I was just like, they tell me a price. I was like, okay, done.
I'll pay it. It's fine. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's
Exactly.
quite, I mean, obviously that's slightly different example, but it's quite a hard skill to have and, know what you kind of want and what you don't want to go lower than. But yeah. Hey, well, you obviously you've facilitated a few of these sales and you also manage, what was it, $100 million worth of,
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
the CFO for maybe 130 million a year in Amazon sales. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. Hey, so how do you work out the value of someone's Amazon business? We'll go into that first and
Sure.
yeah.
So if you're talking about valuing the businesses, the formula is actually pretty simple. It's some definition of profit times some amount of time, normally in a multiple per year of years, and then you're going to add some kind of inventory to it. So let me pull up a screen here and I'll show you,
Okay,
and
cool.
hopefully this will pull right up here. So, okay, this is a super easy sample. There's a lot going on here, but basically, let's say you have some definition of a year's worth of profit. So this particular seller had 144,000 US dollars in their bottom line. But as you can notice here, there are some expenses that are fairly unlikely to be passed on to your future investor, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm a big University of Georgia fan. They are probably not going to buy UGA football tickets the way I did, right? Or if I'm paying myself a salary as the owner. And so if you start looking at the mergers world or the acquisitions world, you're going to hear this term called add backs. And so you're going to take your operating profit and your investor is going to let you add back some. So for instance, that $5,000 for the tickets, that's not going to count against my definition of profit. Same thing with my salary to myself. It might be that some of the research and development or some of the contractors, maybe they give me credit for half of the contractors, 15K, and I'm going to come out with kind of a negotiated number called SDE or seller's discretionary earnings. And this is basically what the investor is saying. This is how we're going to choose to define profit for you on an annual basis. So, Ellen, does that make sense as we kind of like
Yeah,
understand
that's
profit?
great.
So now we've got a real profit number because they're not going to
Yeah.
punish us for our UGA tickets. And then there's going to be, the market is going to dictate some kind of a multiple. How many
Right.
years of that profit is the market willing to pay me for the business? And what's really crazy, Ellen, is, 2 years ago, it would have, for an Amazon business, it would have been kind of here. Maybe 2 to 3x would have been what you would have expected to get for a business. But because of the influx of cash, we're really seeing the deals kind of getting pushed more up towards here, kind of instead of 2 to 3 times profit, maybe 3 to 4 times profit for deal value. And then the only other thing I would add to that is if you have some sellable inventory, like you're sitting on I've already spent my cash to buy the next container of goods.
Yeah.
Generally, an investor will give me some compensation for the fact that I've gone ahead and invested in the future sale. So let me pause there. Does that kind of make sense? Does that resonate?
Yeah, no, that's actually great. And it's real interesting even about that inventory. Say you've got, but can you also add value for the fact that you've gone out and found these suppliers, you've got that inventory there? Is it kind of slightly, that's kind of incorporated into that exit price?
No, it's a good question. I think all sorts of like details will determine how comfortable an investor is pushing the value up or down. So on the positive side, like you kind of alluded to, if I have really good supply chain relationships,
Yeah.
I've got great kind of contracts or really solid kind of secure supply chain, then maybe instead of 3, they maybe would pay a 3.5, right? There may be some additional love you can get because your business is stronger. Now that's going to be similar if you are a top performer in a category, or if you're extremely profitable, or if your reviews are really good, all of that kind of stuff. On the downside, let's say that of this 150K in inventory, half of it is really old. It's stuff that you've had a hard time selling through. It's frankly some SKUs you maybe should have dumped a year ago. Well, the buyer is going to realize that and they're going to kind of punish you, or instead of getting the full 150,000, they're going to force you to write some of it off, and they're only going to give you half of that. And that'll
Right.
ultimately impact the total deal value. In the same way that if your supply chain is flimsy, or if your reviews stink, or if you're not very profitable, you're going to see the value kind of pushed in the wrong direction, right down.
Yeah.
And so the game is to make your business as attractive and beautiful as possible. So when you go to market, you're getting that kind of maximum multiple.
Yeah, right. And so how long would you recommend people, they're obviously actually, I would say, you're kind of starting to think about selling your business. It's not something you just do one day and then the next day you're on the market, right? All of those things you've got to kind of take into account and make sure you've got your reviews, you've got those supply chain, those relationships at the tip-top form. When it comes to like a normal kind of exit price or extraordinary exit price, what are those what sets them apart?
So, okay. So in terms of what separates the best deals, I mean, let me just, because you kind of mentioned this at the beginning, I think in terms of how long you're in business,
right?
I just encourage sellers to kind of know their end goal from the beginning and plan for it. So I would say normally 2 to 4 years is kind of what I'm seeing. Is you build a brand, you kind of get the traction, you optimize it, and then you go ahead and exit unless you really want to try to get big. So that's the answer to that question. Is there's no hard fast rule in timing, but I think having your end goal in mind from day one is a really good idea. And then to your second question, which I just think is such an important question, which is what is it that separates a normal kind of deal from an extraordinary deal, right? I mean, we've had seller accounting just in my CFO practice. We've had 2 6x multiples. So I showed you that picture of multiples. There's like 2, 2.5, 3. We've seen 2 of them that are more than 6x just this year.
Wow.
And what is it that makes that kind of business, different, better than kind of the normal pack? And I've come up with 4 things that I think are kind of the real difference makers between these elite sellers and kind of the rest of the pack. And so I'll just give them really quickly. So the first one is they tend to be extremely profitable. So the average seller, and this is the kind of go, I was telling you a little bit about the study we did last year, Ellen, and we found that the average Amazon seller has about 23% profit after ads. This is kind of before you pay your salaries, your overhead, but just how much margin am I getting to keep after I kind of have Amazon fees, my cost of goods sold, and my advertising, and it's about 23% across the board. But the top players are having that post-advertising margin number be closer to 30%. So think about this. It feels like a small difference, but it's huge. If your products can be fully advertised and actually generate 30% margin, then you have a really, really good product blend. And so they're doing that because they just have better cost structure. They maybe are better at negotiating with their suppliers. They're really good at advertising maybe, or that their brand management. I mean, we all know of brands that carry more weight, right? I mean, Yeti has more weight than some kind of other cup that you might buy, and they've just done a good job.
Would you say that these businesses as well, and it is their own brand, they're not just resale? Do you think that's
Yeah, I would say almost all of them that are getting, so again, kind of back to your first question, probably almost any Amazon business could be sold if you're making pretty good margin. But in terms of these, like you said, Ellen, kind of ordinary versus extraordinary deals, almost none. I don't think I've seen a single extraordinary deal that would be a reseller. So normally we own a brand, we have a trademark, we've done the work to actually build the full supply chain. And as a result, we get to capture more of that margin and we're really profitable.
Yeah, right. And do you talked about the advertising costs and things like that. Do you advise your clients on all of that, or is that something they've kind of worked out?
No, it's a good question. So so we want our clients to be extraordinary. We want them to be extra profitable, and we have to help each of our customers understand what their business is. And what I mean by that is we have a client, I'm thinking of one I had a CFO call earlier today, that they do very little advertising. Their competitive advantage is that they have long, like 20+ year relationships with their Asian suppliers, and they can just flat out generate product at a cheaper price at a higher quality. And so the way they compete on Amazon is that they are just better, cheaper, and they don't need to advertise, right? And so for them, my goal isn't to have them do anything with advertising. Leave it alone. Just keep doing what you're doing. Now, the other client I had a call with earlier today, they're one that really is trying to outcompete some really sophisticated players. We got to advertise to get that real estate on Amazon or whether it's on Shopify. And so again, it just depends. And so what's important to me, and this is kind of, we're talking about the 4 nuggets for the extraordinary. The first one is they're profitable. The second one is you got to have a coherent brand strategy. You can't just wing it. Your portfolio doesn't need to include baby products commingled with supplements, commingled with outdoor, commingled with electronics. It's okay if you serve different niches, but you need to have a plan, and your plan needs to include a fully baked brand strategy. Spend a little bit of money to have beautiful graphics and logos, and do the work of putting yourself in the seat of your future investor so that they can be like, oh yeah, this kind of makes sense. I kind of get what these guys are doing with this brand. Instead of, sometimes I'll talk to a client that has 18 totally different products that are somehow shelved in the same Amazon store. You're still going to be able to sell that, but you're not going to get that extraordinary
Yeah.
valuation that you might get if you have a coherent, kind of cohesive brand, if that makes sense, Ellen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's even, in marketing, right? We always need that coherent messaging, and that kind of flows into that exact same thing, right? You want,
Right.
it needs to make sense. Yeah, that's so cool. And again, there's people out there that do brand strategy and all of that kind of stuff. Do you know anyone that kind of does that, or when they kind of come to it, they've already been doing that from day one?
It's a good question. I don't know if I know anybody who's great at brand strategy as its own thing. I mean, there are some agencies that do the marketing side, and some of them do a really, really good job. In some ways, this is kind of where the seller makes her money or his money, right? Is I want to understand fundamentally what problem I'm solving for my customers. And I want to, from day one, try to engineer products that solve the problems better. And so I know this is an oversimplification, but if I can solve problems better, I can charge a higher price and I can capture more of that profitability, right? And so I think, again, your best deals are the ones that are really profitable. And one of the reasons they're really profitable is that they have a great coherent brand. Ellen, to talk about the third point here. So 4 nuggets here, profitable, they've got a coherent brand. The third one is they do all have investor grade books. So this idea of, you're going to go into due diligence and you're going to be carrying a toolkit with you that helps you get through due diligence. And one of the most important things you have is your financials. And I was with a friend the other day that he was looking to invest in a company, and I'll never, I felt bad for the seller, because we sit down at the table, we start looking at this gentleman's financials, and we realize really early, this guy doesn't understand his cost, and he hasn't presented them in an accrual fashion in his books. And within 5 seconds, my buddy's kind of poking holes in this business. It's almost like the curb appeal you see with a house. And so the trust is almost immediately lowered, and he's never going to get a premium valuation on that business because his books don't reflect reality. And so that's the third thing we see across the board, is the bigger the deal, the more important it is, frankly, to have a tool, Ellen, like A2X, that helps you get your stuff in the right categories in the right months, so that you can tell, again, not just a coherent brand, but I've got to be able to tell a coherent story about how my company is performing financially. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So you want to see that month to month comparison. And obviously, financials, like you said, you want to be planning from day one what your end goal is, and setting that, setting your foundation up to scale, and it's going to help you be more profitable. So they all kind of work together, don't they? These points, like having those accurate financials. Yeah, cool. What would you say the fourth kind of nugget is?
So the fourth one, and this gets a little bit technical again, so I'm just going to pull up my little accountant boy spreadsheet here so I can show it to you, is this thing. You're like, why was this on the screen earlier? This thing called return on working capital. And I'm just going to show you what this looks like. So the best deals in the market, let me just show you 2 examples here with Amy and Baker. Everybody needs to understand not just their profitability, which I'm defining here as kind of after advertising margin, but they also need to understand how good they are at managing inventory. So you kind of think about it this way. I have a certain amount of money, a certain amount of happiness that comes out of my business each year. But the question is not how much happiness comes out. The question is, how much happiness comes out relative to how much I have to put in. In other words, how many tickets do I have to put in the machine each year to get it to kind of print money for me? And so to look at Amy's brand, 3 million in sales, her after advertising, after Amazon fees, after cost of goods sold margin was 600,000, that's 20%. Kind of a little below average margin, but look at her inventory turn. She is turning her inventory almost 10 times per year, which means she doesn't have to have a ton of capital in the business to generate this profit. And so every year she gets $3 of happiness for every dollar she invests in inventory.
Wow.
And that's called return on working capital. If you want to do the simple math, come up with a 12-month measure of profit and divide that number by how much inventory you're having to keep on a regular basis. 600,000 divided by 200,000 is 3. Comparing it to my buddy Baker here, who, if you look at his profit margins, is actually making higher margins on his products. but his inventory turns are so much slower that it takes him more cash, more inventory capital to generate his profit. And so for every year, he gets his dollar back plus $1.12, whereas Amy's getting $3 in profit. And so just to get out of technical speak here, Amy's business is almost 3 times better than Baker's, because Amy's business, for every dollar put in the machine, is going to generate $3 in profit, whereas Baker's is only giving us $1.12. And this is a fairly sophisticated thing to think about, but it is critical for growing, scaling sellers to not take their eyes off the ball. And I'll just give you one more quick example here. Let me move over here a little bit. These are eerily close to the exact numbers of a couple of brands that exited at 6.5+ multiples here this year. And as you can see, their returns on capital are outrageous. They're both very profitable and very good at managing their working capital. And so here's how this really plays out in real life. I take a look at my business and I measure this return on working capital. I'm like, oh, I'm not happy. It's at 2. I wish it was at 3. And so then I have to ask myself a hard question. Is my problem profit margin? If it is, I need to get better at advertising, or maybe charge more for my products, or renegotiate my supply chain. Or is my problem that I've got a bunch of old inventory that I just need to sell through because I've got a supply chain issue? And so it helps me as the CEO focus on, okay, I don't need to worry about supply chain this quarter. Let me worry about my profit margin. And so that I can maximize that return on investment. So for what it's worth, the best deals out there, they're profitable, they have a coherent brand, they have great accounting, and then they're really, really focused on return on precious capital invested, because that ultimately is the most accurate view of how successful they are.
Wow, that's awesome. Hey, that's such good insight. And to work your return on working capital out, that was great. You really, even for me, I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense. But do you manage that for your clients? Like, would you recommend, obviously having a really good bookkeeper, accountant that understands e-commerce, like seller accountants? Like, I know you guys, this is just your second language, right? Or first. But like, do you use any kind of other tools to help you with this, or how do you go about that for your clients?
I mean, from a bookkeeping standpoint, we just use QuickBooks Online, and A2X is a key part of our toolkit, and some other tools to get the accounting right. And then once you have good, coherent accounting, the bookkeeping is good. I wish we had a one-size-fits-all tool that helps us measure, the other stuff. I mean, honestly, if you just take your accounting system, Xero is just as good, and run a 12-month profit and divide that profit by how much cash you have to have tied up in inventory, you can get a good idea of how this performs. So, but to answer your question, yes, one of the core things that our CFO service is doing for our client is helping them understand what their biggest opportunity for improvement is, so that, if you're going to sell the business in 1 month, there may not be a whole lot we can do for you. But if you're going to sell in 6 months, okay, let's optimize your books. Let's help you understand how profitable each of your products are. Let's kill the losers, right?
Yeah.
We're not going to treat them like they're our babies. And let's refocus our precious capital on winners, and then put this packet together so that when we go to market, we have as many yeses as we possibly can have.
Yeah, kind of thing. Cool. Hey, do you, just out of interest, do you use any sort of inventory? I mean, I know there's like no inventory tool that's suitable for every business, but obviously is that quite important? Do you find having a good inventory tool?
Yes and no. Let me just say this: having great inventory accounting is crucial.
Yeah.
And I would say that I have yet to find a tool that I like for even a quarter of our clients, if I can just be honest. So it really, you alluded to it, Ellen, but it's a use case dependent. If you have a relatively small number of SKUs and you're only Amazon, you can use a tool maybe like Inventory Lab, but you could probably use Google Sheets or Excel and get some of the same data. So what's most important is somebody, not even in your accounting firm, but somebody in your company, needs to have a clear handle on the logistics. Where is my product? Is it stuck outside of the LA port? Is it, in manufacturing? Am I going to have to pay a deposit tomorrow? But understanding where my units are, when I have to pay for them, is something that an accounting team like Seller Accountant can help you with. But ultimately, that's one thing you kind of don't want to outsource. You want to have somebody in your team that is understanding when you got to place orders and when you need to pay the cash and that kind of thing.
Yeah, gosh. So yeah, you don't want stock sitting there too long, but you also don't want to run out. It's such, yeah, for sure. Hey, would you say, I know that, we've touched on those 4 kind of key points, but would you say that like diversification of like supply chain, where you sell, who you're selling to comes into it at all? Or I guess
It
that's
does.
kind of,
And it's weird.
yeah,
This is another thing that's so interesting right now is that 2 years ago, 100% we would have said, hey, please diversify your SKUs, diversify your marketplaces, try to go direct to consumer, maybe in a Shopify site. And if you do those things well, you can still capture additional value. But what's so fascinating about these aggregator funds is those guys love simplicity. If you can give me, they don't care about the risk of having 2 hero SKUs that do all of the sales, because what they don't want is pains in the rear, right? And
yeah,
so if you have a viable Shopify business, meaning it's 10% of your sales or more, great. But if you're piddling where it's like, well, it's 98% Amazon and I have just 2 sales a month in my Shopify shop, most of these investors out there are just going to close the shop because it's not worth maintaining the headache.
yeah,
And so the advice almost is, okay, if I have a zone of genius around building these direct to consumer models or other marketplaces, do it and get it up to 15, 20, 30% of your revenue, and then sell your business. You're going to get a higher multiple. But if I kind of stink at it, I got to figure it out. I might just want to focus on Amazon, maybe a couple of Amazon marketplaces, focus on my best SKUs. I mean, some of the best deals we've seen are like 10 products, right? 10
yeah.
products that maybe do 500,000 a year each. I mean, that kind of thing. And so don't be afraid to stay simple unless you really want to go big and invest the cash into doing it.
Yeah, yeah. So if you're going to do something, do it well. That's what my mum and dad always told me. So there you go.
That's right. Yeah, it's like mom was right, and I didn't know she was right, but now I realize, wow,
Yeah,
she was right.
mum was right. Oh my gosh. Hey, that's awesome. I mean, also, should we touch on the study at all?
The one thing I could share from the study that might be new is, I'll just let you see it really quickly. This is just kind of I know this is a little hard to say. This is a screenshot from it. And I just want to point out a couple of things really quickly. This is just an average, whatever, kind of if we made it $1 million seller, we've got about 1/3 of our budget going into product. This is over about $250 million in sales for last year. So this is not a huge study, but it's pretty big. Obviously, we're going to give Amazon some FBA points and some commission points. We're going to have some advertising on Amazon and off Amazon, about 10% total.
Yeah.
And then that PAG number for our top sellers is actually, again, these are pretty strong businesses here, is getting closer to that 29%. We've got to work really hard to keep our overhead down, salaries and everything else. And we want to come out with as much profit as we can come out with. So I don't want to belabor the point here other than just to say, if you're a seller that's a private label brand builder, your job is to maximize profit after advertising, to show your investors that you're growing, and to make your overhead be as lean, mean as you can, which is another reason why having maybe an outsourced team like Seller Account or a great tool like A2X can be so handy, is instead of me having to hire a $50,000 a year employee to do my books or hire a bunch of different contractors, I can simplify things and, make my business clean without the expense.
Yeah, totally. And I think, I mean, I definitely, we've worked with a lot of accountants at A2X, and the ones that know e-commerce, that's going to benefit the business in the long run. And sometimes people are like, oh, do I really need an e-commerce accountant? And it's like, of course you do. They actually understand everything about it. And even just talking to you today, I'm just like, wow, you just know things that I shouldn't say regular accountants, because I'm sure they're all very smart, but they just don't have that expertise in that niche that is e-commerce. So anyone that is watching this, I would highly recommend you go and check out Tyler Jefcoat at Seller Accountant. He puts up awesome blogs. I learn from them, amazing video content. But yeah, basically just thank you so much for coming and sharing with our audience your knowledge on how to sell your Amazon business and things to consider. I'm going to go back and rewatch this and jot down some of those key points. So yeah, everyone can kind of know where to go from here. So thank you so much, Tyler.
Ellen, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and always love talking to you. Thank you.